So once again, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to today's Efma webinar in collaboration with Finastra on cloud adoption in banking. This webinar will be recorded and it will take approximately 45 to 50 minutes, and you will receive the recording after the session is over. You are very encouraged to ask questions during our Q&A. And if you wish to ask anything, you can use either chat box where you type your question, or you can click on little hand icon and then I will approach and you can ask the question. Each one of you will then receive follow-up email with the presentation as well as recording. Now let me introduce you Carlo Giovas, FinTech and Innovation Council Director, who will moderate this session. Welcome, Carlo.
Hello.
Welcome. And today we will be joined by who is a part of the retail banking product management leadership team at Finastra. Nice to have you here, Mary.
Yes, thank you.
Also, Steve Butcher, who is a senior industry architect at Microsoft Enterprise Services, and he's working for the worldwide team leading digital transformation. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
And last but not least, Matthew Frank, who works as lead cloud consultant at KPMG, will join us today. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone.
Right. This is all from my side, and I will pass it on to Carlo now. And Carlo, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Today we are going to discuss about cloud, and we have a very interesting panelist for doing this. And I will start, so then we can, let's say, deepen the different topics with the specific questions. So I will leave the floor to Mary to start the presentation. Thank you.
I'm just waiting for the next slide to come up. Okay. So first of all, good morning, everybody. I'm Mary Connor. I'm a part of the product management team for retail banking here at Finastra. Sitting here in Paddington in good company with Matt Frank from KPMG. And Steve is obviously on the other end of the phone, from Steve from Microsoft. And we'll all be joining in hopefully some very interactive dialogue around cloud this morning. So just to kick things off, we see at the moment a unique moment in retail banking where there's the cloud is on the rise. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We see it everywhere. And just to, vindicate that, it's been a market explosion where we have 27 million customers using neobanks by 2020. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here on the line. I think somebody's got their PC. Somebody's not on mute. Can you please go on mute, everybody? Because I can still hear somebody in the background. Okay, in addition to the rise of cloud and the market explosion that we're seeing, then there's also the AI phenomenon. We probably won't focus we'll focus less on that this morning because really it's in an embryonic stage. However, organizations do see that there's a potential for a 25% reduction in IT costs with the use of AI. And we see that mainly in the KYC, the anti-money laundering space, mainly in the satellites around the core banking. But for this morning's presentation, we're focused on retail banking and the rise of cloud in retail banking. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And this is a commentary in the marketplace that cloud is presenting an unprecedented opportunity to run with a more cost-efficient operating model while simultaneously providing the agility and modernity that legacy systems and on-premise models lack. And we have, that I say we in conjunction with Efma, have done a survey that vindicates this statement. And as we go through the presentations, you'll see some stats and some stack ranking of areas of focus that banks want to prioritize as they move forward in their digital world and also in their cloud journey. Okay, so we move to some questions that are on a lot of banks and a lot of technology vendors' minds and on consultants' minds, on the likes of KPMG. In other words, what does the uptake on cloud banking look like? What is it driving adoption and why? And what apprehensions are there about cloud? So I'm just going to open the dialogue up now and ask Matt, who's here with me, we just start a discussion with him and with Steve, who's on the other end of the line, just about what they see in terms of cloud adoption and what's driving it and what reluctances there are, if any, around it. Okay?
Yeah, sure. So I'll pick that one up, Mary. So I think if we think about thinking about what I do in my job. So I'm a lead cloud consultant at KPMG. We work with clients across many sectors who are either looking at adopting cloud infrastructure to run their systems, or are in the process of doing so, or are already well on the way to doing that. In the financial services sector, that's very much the case, and there are organisations all the way through the financial services sector at those different levels of maturity with their kind of journey on cloud adoption. And I think a lot of the drivers are often around cost and agility. There is what I'm seeing is that there's very little appetite to invest in new on-premise infrastructure or to extend existing on-premise infrastructure. And equally, there's a desire for organizations to kind of leverage some of the capabilities that you get when you operate on the cloud. So things like the ability to scale your compute and storage capabilities horizontally very quickly. So if you need to increase capacity, or you have net new kind of additions to your estate, it's very easy to do that on the cloud, or it's easier to do that on the cloud than it is to add capacity into a data center or to build a data center.
So really talking about scalability here, and it's scalability not only in terms of resources that the cloud infrastructure will use, but scalability in terms of people and processes, because once you move on to the cloud, you remove some of that effort that historically was a part of a traditional establishment.
Absolutely. It's also the kind of the time to value. There's a lot of focus on time to value, time to market these days, and where you have kind of large capital projects to put sort of infrastructure in the ground before you are able to get your systems up and running. That obviously adds time to what you do and how you do it. So if you have the opportunity to avoid doing that, then it's going to give you some kind of advantage in what you do.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, would you like to add anything in here on this topic about things like what apprehensions are there, for example, about going to the cloud?
Sure. So, I mean, before doing so, I think I'd like to add to the points made is the fact that obviously in the UK and across Europe, there was PSD2 and GDPR, etc. So there's a number of regulatory driving factors with regards to how we can achieve that level of compliance. And cloud is a very applicable model where you can have an API gateway in the cloud that ultimately has infinite scalability without the organization really knowing who's going to consume those services. What I'd also add is that we start to see, especially in the retail space and the SME, is that traditional and digital banks want to create these differentiated user experiences. And so, one of the ways of doing that is by identifying behavior and creating more personalized and customer-centric models. And that can only really be achieved by, big data and the tools and technology to process and analyze that data to make those to achieve that level of personalization. And then what we're also seeing in banking is sort of surrounding the financial services products offered through marketplace and ecosystems. And again, cloud is a great way of driving that. So, but going back to your question, the sort of apprehensions, there's a lot of concern, if you will, about cybercrime, about regulatory compliance, around security. And the way that we typically deal with that is we as an organization very focus on FS&I. We have our region, our Azure regions distribution model, so that we support the regional data of data sovereignty and data residency as an example. We work very very closely with regulators. In fact, we have regular summits with the regulators across the globe to sort of help them along the journey. And from a security perspective, we spend billions and billions of dollars investment on the security and cyber security. In fact, we have dedicated teams 24 hours a day. We have advanced threat protection. So it really sort of, alleviates, if you will, that concern. And, we really are starting to see a massive growth, as you said, around movement to the cloud.
Steve, can I ask you one couple of questions about this topic?
Sure.
The first one is, the adoption of the cloud, do you see is more on the IT side to reduce the costs or to improve the service, or it's also a business option, let's say, no? And the second question is, do you see cloud as a way to speed up the open banking, let's say, and manage the open banking wave?
Wow, they're very good questions. Thank you. So let me try and address those. So I think from a business perspective, we see the drivers. One of the hot topics, if you will, one of the patterns we're seeing at the moment is that the traditional banks are really trying to address the challenge of the challenger banks. So thinking about or in the process of creating their own digital banks, and their recognition that the existing core bank or some of the existing core banking platforms can't serve that need. It doesn't give the level of personalization. Hence, working with platforms like Finastra on the cloud is a great model for enabling that digital bank to be achieved in a much more accelerated time frame than we've seen before. I think from an IT perspective, absolutely. There's areas of very cost reduction, especially where there's heavy workloads on the on-prem infrastructure that can be bursted or shifted to the cloud. There's also a big area of focus around data and AI, leveraging the big data, infinite processing power, and all of the tools and technologies that can feed into and leverage that type of proposition. And also, like as an example, with the announcement we made last week at Cybos around payments. Payments is a huge area to focus on the cloud, again, for the reasons highlighted before. So we'll certainly see being both business and IT looking at, driving business and driving acquisition and retaining customers, and IT for cost reduction and also simplification of their infrastructure.
Okay. So thanks very much for that, Steve. What I want to do is just move on to the next slide. So if Mirka can do that, please. So what are bank's top priorities for the coming 1 to 3 years? So when we did this survey, we have about 5 key areas, and if we just move on to the next slide, you'll see what they are. And interesting enough, there's a tie-in with what Steve and Matt both just said. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Okay, So these are the bank's top priorities for the coming 1 to 3 years, okay? And in order of preference, digital transformation. And whilst that's been ongoing for the last few years, there is so much work in established banks around digital transformation. It's a massive job for them. And most of them are starting with their peripheral systems and moving to a more digitally enabled solutions. When it comes to their core, that's the elephant in the room, essentially, you know, and they really have to rethink things. And I'm just going to actually touch upon a project that we at Finastra have been involved in, where a tier one bank in APAC wanted to digitally transform their infrastructure for their international operations. They were running a legacy application of ours, and they realized if they wanted to move to cloud, they would have to replace the legacy solution, which is what they have just done. And they've done that with the help of a telecoms company. I won't mention them because others, other versions are available. And this telecoms company are also providing the services around that. So that was an interesting example of they wanted to digitally transform. They had the elephant in the room, which is the legacy solution. They knew they couldn't take that forward. So they went and replaced it with a more modern solution to give them the cloud enablement. So, you know, just in terms of the top priorities, digital is still top of the pile. And then coming up the back straights is the adoption of emerging technologies. And I think we all see that, and I'm going to come back to Matt and Steve on that shortly. And then there's the innovation piece, because and again, going back to what Steve just said, established banks see a threat from challenger banks. If they're not able to innovate quickly, they will find it very hard to remain relevant in the marketplace. So if I can just ask, and maybe starting with Matt here, you know, how you see these priorities manifesting themselves in the marketplace.
So I think it's clear that a lot of the banking clients that we deal with, the things that have come out from the survey are very much at the forefront of their minds. Digital transformation is a term that's easy to say, it's quite difficult to do, especially when you're a mature banking institution, because you've got responsibilities to maintain kind of stability of your operations and stability of your what you do for your customers. But at the same time, you have to adapt because the competition in that market is starting to increase. A lot of the challenger banks that are starting to come through now do not have the kind of legacy operations and infrastructure that the more mature entities in the market have. So they have a difficult balancing act to maintain, really. So where you have something like the opportunity to migrate systems and platforms to the cloud, it can really help make sure you can successfully achieve your digital transformation. In terms of the adoption of emerging technologies, which is the kind of the next largest sort of focus area according to the survey, we also see a lot of focus on that in our banking clients. There's a lot of appetite to implement machine learning techniques. Sometimes you hear the term AI, but typically where people are looking at applying that, I think in areas such as fraud, anti-money laundering, fraud analytics, and then other areas like customer churn analytics as well. Now, to do that kind of to leverage that kind of capability, you need the ability to process and clean large amounts of data in order to be able to train the machine learning models to a good level of accuracy. And typically, the kind of systems infrastructure you need to support that kind of workload is significant. So it's another driver for moving to the cloud, because the major cloud providers all offer the kind of scale of infrastructure that will allow you to process those kind of workloads at that kind of volumes and velocities.
So Steve, have you got anything to add to that?
Just coming off mute. No, I mean, I think, it's spot on. I mean, the statistics very much show what we're seeing. I mean, there are aspects of this tipping point that there are organizations that are considering, their core banking platform to be moved to the cloud. But ultimately, that's a significant undertaking and generally speaking, a multi-year project. So we start to see those sort of surround projects like open banking, like, as you said, moving your APIs to the cloud, thinking about using data and AI, and those innovation is clearly an area that really is a driving force. Mini pilots, mini projects to prove out in retail banking, personal financial management, and providing that, again, that differentiated user experience is a model where you can push your data to the cloud and then it's accessible outside of the core banking platform. And digital transformation obviously is the umbrella sort of driving that. So absolutely agree with these statistics.
Yeah. So Steve, digital transformation. We're going to come back to that now on the next slide, and also to the innovation piece, because you mentioned a marketplace platform, and we're going to touch upon what Finastra is doing in that space very shortly. But remembering that the top priority was digital transformation. So that was 81% of respondents said that was their priority. And that is no mean feat. And I know you very kindly provided us with some details around that, Steve, about the banking transformation in the digital era and what it means to go from traditional to digital. Would you like to just walk us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a good example, if you take the UK market, just recently, the Monzo announced, their reach past sort of 3 million customers, and the likes of Revolut, etc. And generally see, one of the driving factors, again, is this sort of differentiated experience. So, even the millennials and the older generation, etc., they want to manage their finances in a much more analytical way. And so this is where we're seeing this drive to this personalized customer experiences. We do a lot of work in agriculture as an example. So there's a model where seasonality has a massive impact on the customers. So this big drive from traditional to digital, meaning this customer-centric model. And really the only way you can do that is through having a modern based architecture. If you think about core banking systems of old, they're fundamentally designed to prevent any form of access to data other than for auditing purposes. Whereas now we live in a world that's almost the complete opposite. Data is the oil, as they say, but data and oil needs to be refined. And so the cloud is a way of taking that raw data and making it into rich insight that can drive behavior, can just drive personalization, etc. And so you need an agile open architecture that leverages that real-time capabilities that drives that API economy. And clearly the cloud plus Finastra is a fantastic sort of marriage, if you will, that can really achieve those aspirations.
Okay, thank you for that. We're just going to move on. Sorry,
Mary,
is there?
Can I ask a question? Yes, can I ask a question? Because there is a point that I think is not completely clear here. No, that is, if you move to cloud, no, does this mean that you move with the current core system to the cloud? So you somehow redesign or you rethink this cloud and your core system to the cloud, or you need to migrate to new architecture, new system. So you change your system, you migrate to new system. What are the real alternative for banks, or also consortia? Because many banks are already in outsourcing with the consortia, IT consortia, that manage this. So also for the consortia, there is an alternative to move to this, or they can use their own system, migrate partially or totally their system.
Do you mind if that's a great question. So Within Microsoft, we have a term which is called operating while transforming. And what we mean by that is we're working with a lot of us, especially traditional banks, that really want to compete with the challenger banks. And typically a model we see is we're working with the banks to sort of create an independent digital platform that is working in effect parallel to their core banking system. And that really allows them to achieve in a much more accelerated time frame, you're talking sort of 6-8 months type time frame, to achieve the creation, if you will, of a digital bank that typically would target a different audience. It might be youth, it might be low income earners and such like, that ultimately that could become the core banking platform, or independently they will continue to modernize the core banking. So we really see a sort of a mixture of models, but it's almost the customer behavior that's driving this pattern, this trend for, again, having both the core banking modernization to the cloud, and for some customers independently building a new digital banking platform to target an independent set of audiences.
So that's what we're seeing as well, Steve. It's a mix really. And so absolutely, we're not saying that you have to replace your core banking system, but for some, they will have to replace it because simply it's too old, it's written in COBOL. Either that or they spend an enormous amount of money re-engineering it. And actually, which is better for longevity? It's probably better to replace ultimately. And that's what we're seeing. But we're seeing with banks that are running maybe solutions that are 30 years old, they can do some re-engineering around them and get them onto the cloud. But they're focusing in the short term on the more peripherals around the core banking before doing the bigger piece. I don't know what you see, Matt.
We're seeing, I mean, just to echo what you both said there, we're seeing exactly the same. There's a mixture of approaches being taken in this particular market sector. Some organisations, the sort of more mature banking organisations, are creating internal challenger banks. And as Steve was saying, they're targeting certain market segments, and they have an ambition that over time that particular kind of challenger institution will become the new banking institution. We're also seeing some organisations, take sort of very bold decisions around their core platforms, where their core platforms are generally, as Mary was saying, very difficult to kind of migrate because they're probably running kind of legacy mainframe technology, which is not easy to break up into sort of microservices that you could run on in a serverless fashion on the cloud. But some organisations are taking on that challenge because there are some, there needs to be succession planning around those platforms. The skill sets to maintain them are becoming increasingly scarce. You have supplier concentration risk, which obviously regulators are concerned about because there are fewer and fewer suppliers who can help maintain those platforms for you. So there's lots of reasons to actually try and tackle the core platforms. It's not easy to do. One of the approaches we've seen is there is some technology now where you can virtualize mainframes and effectively create a mainframe as a service. And we've seen some institutions actually leverage that technology to take their mainframe based core systems over onto the cloud. That's very much in the minority, though. I think, as Mary was saying, the kind of focus at the moment in our banking clients is really taking the systems that surround the core onto the cloud first, which gives them then some time and some thinking space to think about how they tackle the core platform. The other big approach we're seeing is, as I said initially, is institutions that aren't challenger banks themselves creating their own challenger brands and their own challenger technology platforms.
Yeah, because as we see, every new bank that comes to market, they're only interested in cloud. They have no interest in on-premise solution at all, which actually brings us on neatly onto the next question, which is, do you have a cloud adoption strategy? So what our survey showed was 54% of respondents do have a cloud adoption strategy. The strategy is in place, but to be executed in 12 to 24 months. Now, I'm probably slightly surprised about that, because from the banks we've spoken to, they're talking 3 years out, not 24 months out. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves in the marketplace, but I suspect it will take them longer, because what we have seen here in Finastra in terms of cloud enabling Fusion Essence is that there's a huge amount to learn as you go along. It's a massive learning curve. You need to do a lot of preparation, and even with the best will and minds in the world, there are still things that you will not mop up in your planning initially that will pop up later along the line. So that's why I think that the execution will be later than 24 months. So now if we just go on to the next, the bank's key challenges, what they see as their key challenges, and we're just going to show you what the survey revealed from the next slide, which is that banks, and we're talking here about established banks for the first one, it's customer acquisition and retention. I think we've all read enough about the customer experience, improved customer experience. So things like an experience that Revolut can provide, this is what established banks are trying to achieve. So this is a focus, because otherwise you become invisible in the marketplace. And then a fast time to market, I guess this is product launching capabilities, more modern solutions, particularly cloud-enabled ones, will have a product launching capability. And then the interest in innovation. So traditionally, banks tend to innovate around their core. That presents all kinds of problems when they go to upgrade, or somebody's written something, there's a key person risk, and the knowledge resides with one person, they leave. You know, really what we see in the marketplace is that banks want to consume apps off a marketplace platform. And we're going to come back to this in a few minutes in terms of Finastra's Fusion Fabric.cloud platform. So what we are going to do is connect up our banking platform, Fusion Essence, with Fusion Fabric.cloud to enable our clients consume innovation basically on tap. And all of this is predicated upon having a rich suite of REST APIs or open APIs to enable that connectivity from marketplace platform back to the banking platform. So yes, innovation is we see it comes up in every single bid and tender that we're asked about. And I'm just going to ask Matt if he is seeing the same.
So there's a lot of focus across all market sectors on the ability to be agile and innovate. I think banking is no exception, and the results of the survey certainly seem to support that hypothesis. A lot of organisations who are relatively mature in their markets are looking at ways of either acquiring or retaining customers, delivering products more quickly to market, which is the survey here seems to indicate that this is where the focus, things that are at the forefront of people's minds. What I would say about innovation is it's an easy word to say, it's a really difficult thing to do, especially in mature organisations. There's quite a lot of research going on at the moment about how you foster a culture of innovation, and a lot of the kind of more traditional organisational hierarchies that banks tend to operate often are not the most productive environments for innovation. So what we're seeing with our banking clients is they'll often set up a sort of separate venture to run their innovation projects. I mean, the thing with innovation is that you have to try many different things before you find the thing that works. And in business, often that's not in a traditional organisation, that's not something that financially is very productive. So you have to set up an organisation with sort of operations and structures that really allow people to try things and innovate, which means that you have to understand how that's going to be funded, because your success measures are going to be different from the way that you measure success in delivering kind of more traditional deliveries.
Thank you for that. We're just going to move on now to what is actually driving banks to the cloud. And for me personally, I found this the most interesting aspect of the survey, because we all make our own assumptions internally, but are they valid? So we just move on to the banks. What's driving banks to the cloud? Okay, so we see here the top one is a simplified IT structure, then followed by cost reduction, then security and innovation. Well, innovation at number 3, but in a way, simplified IT infrastructure and cost reduction, for me, they're kind of inextricably linked, because once you move to the cloud, not only is your IT structure simplified, but you should have a lower operating cost. I want to go over to Steve now and just ask him how this reflects upon his experience as a Mr. Microsoft, and talk us through it, what he sees.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, this is the first time I've seen the numbers. I mean, I think that there's some I agree with. Obviously, we mentioned about the simplified IT infrastructure. We talked about innovation earlier. Often within banks, just the simple procurement of hardware can take months and months, as opposed to having an environment available within seconds on the cloud. So I agree with the innovation. The compliance and security, we see that, I'm with a bank this week as an example, where over 60 to 70% of their investment in IT is just around keeping the lights on, so therefore moving to the cloud is a significant advantage. I guess the customer centricity, I would have expected a higher percentage, with a real sort of focus on, but the banks sort of typically we work with struggle with. They know that they need to achieve it. So I would have expected maybe that to be a bit higher. Of course, cost reduction is significant. Whether you're thinking about a digital bank or modernization of core banking, or, line of business, whether it be risk or fraud or other areas, cost reduction is a significant aspect. And then, wider choice cloud native banking solutions, clear with, Finastra and platforms such as that, it makes a clear choice that, gives such a huge amount of value and capabilities on the cloud that I probably would have expected 40% to be higher. But overall, I think it's a very, very valid picture.
Good, because, yes, is that Carlo?
Yes. I would like to have another slide here. What's prevent the bank to go to the cloud? Because the advantage or some advantages are really clear. But it would be interesting to see also the other side of the coin. Let's say, why they don't come to the cloud.
I personally think there's nothing preventing them. I think it's just time and motion. I think, it depends how conservative or ambitious the banks are. So if you look at somebody like Santander, is a very ambitious bank. It's willing to try out anything. Then if you flip on the other side of the coin, look at a Lloyd's banking group, a far more conservative operation. So I think partially it's down to the culture within the bank itself.
I think that's exactly right, Mary. What I'd say in answer to that, Carlo, is that what's stopping banks from moving to the cloud, I'd say to themselves. I think that pretty much every banking client that I've worked with this year, whether that's retail or investment banking, is either in the process of migrating platforms to the cloud or in the process of preparing to do so. And not just in banking, that's also in other financial services organisations as well. I think there's a fear of the unknown as well. I think that in organisations which are highly regulated, which banks are, there is a appetite to operate in a way that will comply with whatever requirements, regulatory requirements they have to comply with. So sometimes it's also about understanding the path that they need to go on, and make sure they have pathfinders either within their own organisation or within their partner ecosystem that can help them with that journey.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think that there's no reason as such. I mean, often we get issues with regards to regulatory compliance, and again, we work very closely with the regulators, and we've got proof points of multiple customers that are running either line of business or banking solutions in the cloud, security. So there's a whole number of concerns, should we say, but there aren't necessarily barriers. And I agree that often these are internal policies and taxonomies rather than actually rules and regulations.
So thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, so we're all pretty much aligned, even if we didn't discuss it beforehand. So now we're just going to move on to see how banks will benefit from the cloud. And actually, it's no coincidence that there's quite a strong correlation between what is driving banks to the cloud and how banks will benefit from the cloud. So we can just move on to that, and then you see the front runner is operational efficiency and lower cost of ownership. And with scalability, because in the cloud you can scale without the commensurate investment in infrastructure and people. And then number 3, I'm just going to call out the top 3, the speed of innovation. We've touched on it before, the ability to consume innovation as it happens, because as we all know from using our mobile phones, how within the space of 3 years, it becomes very disposable, their user interface. And if you're a bank, you don't want to be dealing with that. You want to be able to search and replace effectively in terms of some of the apps that you're consuming. So we're just going to move on to the next slide, where we're just going to touch briefly and selfishly on Finastra's cloud-based, Microsoft Azure cloud-based open API platform. Now, this marketplace platform is where any of you out there on the call, whether you're an ISV, whether you're a systems integrator, a bank, university, can go on to the Sorry, somebody's got unmuted their phone. If they can mute it again, please. They can go on to the FusionFabric.cloud platform, and they can basically code in a low-code environment, create their own apps, and then monetize them on the marketplace platform. Now, we already have several hundred either whether it's universities or independent software vendors on this platform using it. And in fact, you can access it from the Finastra.com website. We are connecting up FusionFabric.cloud, our marketplace platform, to our core banking systems, in particular Fusion Essence, with a whole suite of REST and open APIs. So to give our banks the ability to consume innovation on tap. We know there are others doing something similar in the marketplace. We've been told that our model is quite advanced. We're quite proud of it, and I would encourage you all to go on to Finastra.com and check out FusionFabric.cloud, because this is how we will protect our clients' investments in their core banking environments going forward, because they will consume from the marketplace platform rather than coding directly back into a core environment. So just moving on from the marketplace platform, because this actually ties into the next slide, which is, if you're going to cloud, do you go big or do you go hybrid? I think we touched on this earlier. What we're seeing is more of a hybrid approach to cloud. I'm going to ask Steve, because in Microsoft they get a lot of exposure to this. Would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that this is a great slide that illustrates what we were saying before, is the fact that one of the benefits we have is with regards to Azure is our enterprise legacy, and the fact that we have what we call this hybrid cloud model. So the ability that if you're trying to modernize your infrastructure, if you're thinking about modernizing your cloud, then ultimately you can bring your on-premise integrated with the cloud and start to leverage the capabilities that the cloud offers through a very highly secure, low latency connection. We have many customers that have done that, and it's a great sort of model, if you will, a sort of low risk, for want of a better word, model to move to the cloud and leverage those capabilities as you described there, whether that be as a SaaS, IaaS, or PaaS model.
Yeah. And Matt, would you, any commentary? I guess you concur with that, because I certainly would. It's easy.
Violent agreement, but I think the key thing here is that whilst the simplest thing to do on the surface is to move everything to the cloud, in reality that's very, very difficult to achieve. And to achieve that within a 5-year time horizon is challenging. So the reality for most of our banking clients is they're looking to migrate as many systems and platforms as they can to the cloud. But some of those things, such as the kind of core platforms that we've been talking about during this conversation, are things that aren't going to just go up to the cloud. That they will take time and effort to figure out how to do that. So in the meantime, what that means is that most organisations end up in a hybrid model by default. Now, hybrid is actually quite complicated, and it can be tricky because you've got to manage things on premise and on the cloud. So you have and you have to manage the interconnects between what you have running on premise and running on the cloud. What's interesting for me is that all of the large cloud providers, and Steve will certainly, I'm sure, will have some insight on this, are now starting to think about how they can help their customers manage that process. So there's a lot of drive in the IT industry towards containerizing systems, platforms, and applications. When you start to containerize things, what then happens? One of the benefits of containerization is that you can start to move those workloads around more easily, whether that's within your on-premise estate or within the cloud, or between on-premise and the cloud. So for me, one of the kind of technology enablers for moving to the cloud, and B, operating in a hybrid fashion, if that's indeed what needs to happen, is containerization. Steve, I don't know if that's something that's you're seeing kind of traction in at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So, I mean, I think that there's two aspects to that. So one is, we have the systems and the tools that allows you to manage both your on-prem and your cloud, through a single pane of glass. So from an administration perspective, it makes it, it simplifies that exercise, and we have tools that, enable that. To your point around containerization, absolutely. There are, it certainly allows you to manage those aspects. I mean, one of the points you have there about sort of mobile and deployable apps is the fact that I mentioned earlier about personal financial management, and containerization is a great way, as you said, of containing and isolating particular capabilities or functional areas, should we say, that, as you said, can be moved or migrated from on-prem to the cloud, on a sort of a gradual incremental basis. So, I mean, the great thing is the cloud offers multiple different ways to achieve that through, integration through various aspects of PaaS, etc. So, one of the things that we do in Microsoft Services is work very closely with our customers to advise and take them on that journey to achieve, the biggest impact at the shortest accelerated time frame.
And yeah, just on that note, Steve, because we've relied on Microsoft a lot in terms of our cloud enablement, and being perfectly honest, we couldn't have done it without their advice and expertise in terms of moving our solutions to the cloud, whether it's bringing Fusion Essence onto the cloud or launching the marketplace platform, fusionfabric.cloud. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide, and for the sake of brevity, I'm probably going to whistle through the last few slides. So I think, there's absolutely no doubt about it. Cloud adoption in banking is rising. I mean, cloud adoption is rising generally, and you can all read for yourselves here that by 2020, 36% of enterprises will use the cloud to support more than half of their transactional systems. That's from Gartner. So, cloud is here, it's here to stay. So just moving on and some conclusions from the presentation here this morning. If we can just go on, I'm not going to dwell too much on the next slide, which is about the rise to the cloud, but rather, because these are all points we've already covered within the presentation this morning, but rather going to focus on these 3 points here. These are the key takeaways from this session. Cloud, it's happening faster than we expected. If I think back 2 years, we just had ad hoc requests about cloud, and every single engagement involves dialogue around cloud, and that presents its own challenges in terms of upskilling our own in-house resources, but also leveraging resources of the likes of Microsoft and KPMG. The digitalization, you need to digitalize. We all know, we saw that was a top runner in terms of things banks need to do, and they need to do that to have a better cloud experience. And finally, innovation and collaboration. We've talked about that, ideally on a marketplace platform like FusionFabric.cloud, so then you can consume at will. And just one last point, so going back to the diagram that Steve just spoke to, go big or go hybrid, we see more of a hybrid market at the moment. I think, a pure cloud environment is definitely a few years away. I'm just going to ask Matt here if he sees the same thing, and Steve in turn.
I think it really depends on where you're coming, what your starting point is, where you're coming from. So the kind of, some of all of the challenger banks that we work with, they are digital native organisations. When everything that they've built and created has been on the cloud. They have no on-premise infrastructure because the way that they have been incepted and created, everything's on the cloud. A lot of the more mature organisations in the banking market aren't in that position. So many of those do have things on premise and will continue to do so for quite some time to come, I think.
Steve, last word from you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, and also there's other aspects just to, there's around sort of the DevOps and cloud ops and the change of mindset, if you will. There's a whole bunch of sort of process and people that surround, making an organization, these large organizations to the cloud. But certainly agree with that. We have, cloud native banks that we're working with, and with the traditional banks where we're, going on a modernization incremental journey. So, but it's as you said, much more accelerated and further forward than maybe would have predicted a few years ago.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement on that. So thank you very, very much. Thanks to Carlo, thanks to Mirka and the people at Efma for hosting this. And
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mary, Steve, and Matt. I think it was a great presentation. I really like it because it was short but clear on the main aspect of this challenge. And I think you give also a business perspective why not only the IT side could think about this, but also on the business side that there are very interesting elements and aspects that they should consider to push us in this direction, because there are clear advantage on this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now it's time for your questions. We do have actually one question, and it's, what are the key concerns in adopting cloud in banking? Are there any concerns you would like to address?
I can have a go at answering that. So key concerns that I've seen in banking, and actually it's not just in banking, is security and finance. So a lot of organisations are concerned about moving to the cloud from a security perspective. They feel kind of safer on premise. I think that's actually a bit of conscious or unconscious bias. Typically, what we observe is that all of the major cloud providers have very significant security footprints. If you look at very simple metrics like the ratio of security focused personnel to non-security focused personnel, you'll find that pretty all of the cloud vendors have very high proportions of security, technical security engineers in their staffing. In terms of, and that often those ratios are much higher than the organisations that are their customers. So I think it's understandable why people would be concerned about that. But one thing I would suggest on that is that if you have concerns about security, it's well worth speaking to the cloud vendor and to partners like ourselves about those concerns, because those are things we can help work. We can all help you work through. In terms of finance, people, when you move to the cloud, you move to more of a slightly different financial treatment, accounting treatment. So you'll typically spend more OPEX than CAPEX. Whereas when you're running on premise, it's the opposite way around. So there are some things about how you budget and what you need to do in terms of financial planning. You also need to make sure you have some good governance in place, because what you want to make sure is that in tech, you have, Steve mentioned the kind of move towards kind of DevOps. You now also have something called FinOps, which is a very new kind of discipline, but it's the marriage where DevOps is the confluence of development and operations into single teams who are responsible for both those activities. FinOps is the same, but for finance and operations. So you start to see some interesting emergence of teams where you have not only developers and people who are traditionally developers, people who are traditionally operations staff. You also have people who are traditionally from a finance background getting involved now as well. So there are ways of dealing with those challenges. It's certainly something that organisations like KPMG and cloud vendors can certainly advise on.
Yeah. And just to add to that, the other thing that banks will think about, as in addition to what Matt has already said, is just how they restructure themselves operationally to actually manage, because it'll be a different model when they go into the cloud. If you just think about something like, for example, disaster recovery, whereas in a traditional model, the onus was on the bank. Now they're, devolving that responsibility into the cloud. So yeah, there's a lot to think about operationally as well.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely right, Mary. Your internal operating model is something that you need needs thought. You also need to consider what's known as the shared responsibility model, where your responsibilities and your cloud vendors' responsibilities need to be clearly understood. And that's again something that if it's something that sounds like a bit of an alien concept, don't worry. Cloud vendors and organisations such as the people who've been speaking today are quite familiar with, and it's things that people can assist you with.
Okay, and Steve, I think Steve is still there. Do you want to add one final comment on that before we close the session?
Sure. I think that this is where again Microsoft Services and Microsoft and KPMG would work together to identify what the customer's concern might be. We work very closely with the regulators. We have a great partnership with them. Whether it's security, risk, compliance, or any other factors, we would work closely with the customer in a partnership-based model to alleviate that and basically go through and drive that forward. So most, if not all, of the challenges that we've faced, we've overcome. So hopefully, that's we've covered that.
Okay, that's great. So thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Our speakers for their great presentation and lively discussion. And if you have any questions, please contact us, and we will try to answer them. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.